Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're very excited tonight about our webinar, Nature on the Board. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. I want to say good evening to everyone in Australia, good morning to our wonderful friends from the United Kingdom joining us today, and welcome to everybody. Today, we are talking about representing nature on the board, what's possible in Australia. I'm really so genuinely delighted to have these amazing women from the United Kingdom. I'll introduce them in just a moment, but we're going to be talking about what they've been doing in the United Kingdom and other places and what's possible here in Australia. But first, I'd like to acknowledge country. If you're joining us from somewhere other than Australia, it's become an appropriate tradition in Australia for many of us to acknowledge whose land we're on. Australia is a colonial nation, and the British Empire, when it decided to colonise this continent, took over lands that were already belonging to other people and continue to belong to other people. So I personally would like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the Cubby Cubby people's land here in the Moreton Bay Shire area, north of Brisbane. And when I look out across the landscape from up the hill behind my house, I'm actually looking across the beautiful Glasshouse Mountains, and that's Jinnaburra country. So I'd like to welcome and acknowledge all First Nations peoples this evening and acknowledge that land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And that's a map of Australia that mostly depicts Aboriginal nations, the remarkable heterarchical governance system that they developed over millennia. In a minute, I'll tell you about one of the organisations that my organisation partners with, the Future Dreaming, and how important it is to groups like AELA to be involved in the decolonisation of our thinking about the living world, about how we may or may not speak for nature, and the work that we all do to try to shift towards an earth-centred future. That's the modern map of Australia. That big red arrow shows you where I am, a bit north of Brisbane, beautiful part of the world. So a little bit about AELA. For those who don't know us, we're a small not-for-profit organisation based in Australia. Our folks, our staff, our volunteers are all around the place. We get together in person, but we're mostly virtual. What we're interested in is how we shift our culture and governance systems from a human-centred worldview and way of being to an earth-centred worldview and way of being. We've got a range of multidisciplinary programs. We do have an Earth Laws focus. We do a lot of work around educating folks around rights of nature, legal personhood, ecocide, eco-rep, eco-governance and such. But we've also been really keen to ensure that the work of Earth jurisprudence, this idea of critiquing the underpinning structures of modern societies, branches into all elements of our governance space. So that includes the economy, and we sister with and co-founded the New Economy Network Australia. We work in a range of deep ecology and earth ethics spaces, bioregionism, and a lot of education. And really, really important to us is working in partnership with a range of Indigenous knowledge holders and organisations. So if you don't know about AELA, please do get in touch with us. We're fascinated with creating alternative pathways, and that's why we're so excited about the session tonight. I've been watching Nature on the Board developments for a couple of years, and when we connected with the Lawyers for Nature, wonderful ladies, Jessie and Brontie, it's been really fun to get together. And the only other thing I want to say about AELA's work really is that while we're inspired by particularly Thomas Berry's works and a reflection back into Western systems, sort of the white people looking at white systems, what we're also passionate about in this country is how earth-centred governance systems had emerged and been created by First Nations peoples for such a long time that they are a deep inspiration and an incredibly powerful body of work to learn from, but to respect and to acknowledge Indigenous leadership in this country. Okay, so I won't talk for much more, but a lot of what AELA has been interested in for the last decade is how do we shift the way human beings think about and govern themselves in relationship with nature. We often say that we're not involved with the direct scientific analysis of nature. What we're interested in are the human beings and how they work together, how they organise, structure, think and create. And so for me personally, as a recovering lawyer, I find Nature on the Board a fascinating space. And we'll come back throughout our discussions tonight to the different structures that exist in Australia. And I just wanted this little slide with one of my most favourite creatures on the planet, a blue-banded bee, a little blue-banded bee bum, in fact, to remind us that in Australia we have a number of different ways for human beings to get together, to become incorporated, and by incorporated, they become seen in the law as an entity. And we have companies, cooperatives, and associations in various forms of each. And we'll be talking about a bit of that tonight, and we'll come back to it again at the end in questions and discussion. So that's my little intro, and I'm going to stop sharing. But now what I'm really delighted to do is welcome Brontie and Jessica to introduce the work that they're doing within Lawyers for Nature. So Brontie and Jessica will present an overview of the work they're doing, and then they'll be in conversation with Laura and Kelly, and I can't wait to hear about the work that they've been doing inside their own company. And here I am being greeted by another being of the Earth community. Please forgive my cat. Okay, thank you so much. Over to you, Brontie.
So good morning, everyone from my side of the world, and good evening to everyone from Michelle's side of the world, and everyone in between, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. So lovely to be with Michelle here today. Can I just, first of all, thank my co-hosts, because everyone's giving up their time for free. So I'm super grateful that you guys are with us today, and thank you so much. Kelly and Laura take on the responsibility of sharing stories as they see. The external sharing of stories is something really, really important to this project. So thanks, guys. So without further ado, I'll just start sharing my screen, if that's okay, because I have some slides to show you. So you should be able to see that now. Let me just move my post out the way. Okay, there we go. So you should be able to see our slides now. So Jessie and I are just going to talk you through some of the work we've been doing here in the UK. In reason being is we feel that nature on the board is a really special thing that essentially can be taken on by anyone. And I say this, of course, is also as same as Michelle, as a recovering lawyer, but we do think it's such a simplistic and simple concept, but also so incredibly powerful at the same time. And I think one of the things I really like about Nature on the Board is it's quite rare for those two things to come together in our society, where something is possible by anyone, but also super powerful. So I do think it is a point of leverage. So in order to, there's us, by the way, that's our other colleague who isn't here today, Paul. But yeah, let me just say very quickly, Lawyers for Nature is one of the only collective of lawyers, certainly in the UK, who states that nature is its client. So although we do work with humans, we don't do that in the traditional way a law firm would do. So we don't prioritize humans and their best interests. We act for nature. It does mean that sometimes we have to get paid by humans, but we always keep nature's interests at the forefront of all our work. So we act as if nature has rights, and we educate others within the movement and with outside the movement, and create legal rules that would allow people to embody a world where nature has rights. So the first thing I'm going to do, which I alluded to in my introduction, is start with this quote by the wonderful Rebecca Solnit. So if you haven't discovered Rebecca Solnit yet, I urge you to. She is one of the most beautiful humans and writes amazingly well. And I went to see her speak in August, and her opening line of her speech was this: a crisis is a crisis of storytelling. And I do remember a lot more about the speech, but this line particularly stuck with me, and I couldn't shake it and I couldn't let it go. And it was so powerful for me, because it really made me realize that everything we've been doing over the last 3 years is attempting to address the polycrisis that we find ourselves in with new stories. And it finally made a lot of my work make sense, in that you tell a story, but you don't always know where it's going to go, how it's going to be taken on board by other people, how it's going to transform. And so storytelling is quite a leap of faith, really, to put a story out there and hope that it gets taken on board in the world. And it also made sense to me when I thought about where story fits in. So the way story fits in, and one of the reasons why we find ourselves in a crisis, and a crisis of storytelling particularly, is that story is right at the beginning. So we've lost so much as a species, certainly in the West, certainly in the UK. We don't sit round campfires anymore. We don't tell each other folk stories. We don't tell stories that lead to moralistic understandings anymore. And so, in my opinion, story is right at the beginning, and story informs morality, which informs ethics. And once you start to inform ethics, you can start to inform politics and to place those stories within the political system. And law, of course, is really just politics codified. So where before, when I was a proper practicing lawyer in a law firm and I was a corporate lawyer, I was right at that very end of that journey. I wasn't really seeing the stories at the beginning, I was just acting at the end, which is often one of the major problems of law, in that it is the last port of call, it is the last place. When you act there without really thinking about the beginning, it's really problematic because you can't trace that new paradigm through to law. So it's important for lawyers, accountants, business people to really start thinking about the stories that they're telling. Now, in order to illustrate this point, I'm going to channel the very famous author Hemingway. The More Than Human is already coming in. Hemingway, who did, if you know Hemingway, you'll know that he created a 6-word story, which is a very famous, very, very short story with just 6 words in it. And my claim to fame is that I'm going to beat that story this morning, and I'm going to tell you a 3-word story. And my 3-word story is about trash. It's about waste. And it is this: throw that away, with quite significant emphasis on the word away. So what I'm doing here is I'm illustrating the fact that every single day we create waste and trash, and we turn to our children, our friends, our colleagues, and we say, throw that away. And I'm going to ask you to think about where away actually is. Because in this story, we are assuring the person throwing their trash away that it's going somewhere special, that it won't affect anybody, that it certainly isn't going to affect us, but it also isn't going to affect others, other species, other people around the world. It's telling a story that there is a magical place called away. And we say these words all the time without understanding that we're actually telling a story, that one word away tells a story. And the reality is, of course, there is no away. There is only places which we don't have to deal with this stuff. There are only places that we don't have to look at it all the time. And in fact, of course, our trash often comes back to us because of course, it disconnects us. So that one single word tells a story that we're not all connected, that if we send our trash far, far away into the other side of the world, that it won't come back because the seas are not connected, the rivers are not connected. But of course, we all here today know that none of that's true. So all of us are telling stories in our everyday lives, and this is just one example. This is a 3-word story that we say every day. So next time you say, throw that away, I really, really want you to think, where is away? And I'd like you to start telling a different story if possible. So on that basis then, what is our story as business people, as leaders, as maybe even thought leaders, as activists, as lawyers, accountants, artists and creators? What is our story when we think about the organizations that we've created, that we lead, that we work in? What about if we started to tell a story that nature was considered a legal person with rights, with power, with influence, with agency? What would our organizations look like if we all started to tell that story together, singing from the same sheet, that nature has the ability to enter into human-centric decision-making spaces and give its view, maybe even have a vote, maybe even have a veto in some circumstances? What would your world look like if you imagined space for nature at the table? And to pinch Laura's company's very famous saying now, what would nature say? What would it say about what you do, about the stories that you tell, about the actions that you take, about the way that you move through your organization, about the way your organization moves through the world? What would it say to you? How would it ask you to tell a different story? So this all started when the very wonderful Simeon Rose from the brilliant company Faith in Nature came to us at Lawyers for Nature and also the lawyers at Earth Law Centre and said, we were just wondering, if you have 5 minutes, could you tell us if we can make nature our boss? And that kicked off a year-long project where we began to create a genuine, accountable, transparent, meaningful seat at their boardroom table for nature. And it culminated at the end of 2022 with Faith in Nature actually appointing a director to their board of directors who is a nominee for nature. Now, I've got a really short video which may help situate this project. I'm going to play it and hopefully you'll be able to hear the sound.
So there's an internal philosophy at Faith in Nature that nature is the boss. Recently, we started to wonder, well, what if nature really was the boss? It's kind of crazy, but at the same time, we kind of need to be asking crazy questions, I think. It felt right that a company called that should be asking this question. But I can't answer it. So I started digging around, and the more it became apparent that there are people out there who might be able to, well, I called them up.
So the plan is to interview you and then stick you to a tree. I'm going to be on an iPad stuck on a tree. I mean, I think the idea of making nature a director would probably feel crazy to many lawyers, but I'm a lawyer who is always open to ideas. I believe that the rights of nature will be to the 21st century what human rights were to the 20th. And that makes it a really exciting area to work in. We do need to have nature's voice and nature's interests represented in our legal, political, and economic systems. And I realized the ridiculousness of that imbalance when I was sitting under a yew tree that was thousands of years old. And yet I could go on my phone and in about less than an hour, create a company that would have more legal rights and standing than that tree.
Currently, our entire legal system, our economic system, our social systems are very anthropocentric, meaning humans are the center of the universe. And the result of this is that we've left nature out of the conversation. Our laws work to protect humans above nature, as if we are separate from nature, which is not true. And the result of this has been that humans have destroyed nature, exploited it to the maximum extent possible because our laws tell us to do that. So I was very surprised to get this email from Faith in Nature. Rarely do we get a company that wants to integrate rights of nature into their corporate structures.
So the lawyers did their thing and we did ours. And today we're making nature the director of our company. Nature has an equal vote, same as any other director, same as the rest of us.
Effectively appointing a director that's representing the voice of nature within the company.
That person is independent of the company, and we've tried really hard to ensure that there's a separation of powers, because it's really important that that director feels able to act in the best interest of nature. It's a huge step to saying everything Faith in Nature does is set out to essentially do no harm, protect nature, to recognise nature, to give nature rights, to give nature power, and to give nature a vote. And that's why this is really important.
From this point onwards, we've very literally put the natural world at our boardroom table. We can't be willfully blind anymore to the impact that we're having on the natural world and on the planet in what we do. Faith in Nature is the first company in the world to appoint nature to its board of directors. But we don't want to be the last. And it becomes meaningful when it's not just us doing it. The model exists. We're now making that available to whoever wants it in the hope that other companies adopt it too. It would be massive if there was a voice for the natural world in every boardroom of every business on the planet. If business wants to be the good guy, it can be.
So that was the Faith in Nature video, which you can get and watch again in your own time, and I'm sure they'll happy to share it with you. And just after we announced the Faith in Nature project, we were almost immediately contacted by House of Hackney, who were blown away by what Faith in Nature did and had for a long time had nature as their muse. They are an interior design company, luxury brand, and they had realised that they had been using nature as their muse for a very long time without really genuinely giving it any power. And so they were the perfect next target for this project. And we're very lucky to have Kelly with us today from House of Hackney. And House of Hackney wanted to do something slightly different to Faith in Nature, and that's why we brought them along here today. They wanted to start to think about future generations. Now, they're the first to admit that they are right at the beginning of that journey. And where Faith in Nature had modelled the nature director role, House of Hackney then had to take on and model the future generations role, which is a big ask. And the difference here is they started to think about the much longer term impact of their organization's actions, in that they were beginning to identify the equitable share of the current system vis-a-vis future generations of all species, all life on Earth, and to start to think about mapping what is fair in all circumstances, and if you can't make it fair, how you would begin to make reparations or provisions for future generations within your scope of power. And so their director is called Mother Nature and Future Generations Director. It's currently embodied by one human being who has the remit to speak for both of those interests. That may well change in time. They may well appoint a second person, or even, for example, they might think about how to channel future generations in a slightly different way than using a human being. But the important thing at House of Hackney is they insisted that director is independent of the company. So the salary they receive is not linked to the bottom line of the company. They're not required to be in the business every single day. They've not got any KPIs linked to the economic aspects of the company and the bottom line in the traditional sense. Instead, they have things like impact performance indicators, which help the business stay on track with their obligations to Mother Nature and future generations. And Kelly will say quite a lot more about their work. So over the last 2 years, we've been working with a whole bunch of organisations. This is actually just some of them. In fact, this is a slightly older slide now, and there's more and more coming every month. So these are some of the people we've worked with. They are a mix of for-profit corporates, not-for-profit, what we would call in the UK a CIC, which is a kind of a community benefit organisation, and now charities. And very excitingly, we've just started some work with the National Infrastructure Commission in Wales, which is a public body and was one of the first, if not the first public body, I believe, to appoint nature to its commission. And we're working with them now to look at the impact that that's had over the last 3 to 6 months and produce a report on the types of decisions that nature has an impact on. So I'm going to hand over to Jessie now, and she's going to carry on talking to you.
Thank you, Brontie. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be here and wonderful to be sharing this webinar with all of you and these wonderful speakers who've come along today. So I wanted to talk a bit more about the kind of process that we took here in the UK in order to appoint nature to the board. And from the work we've looked into over the last few weeks, it appears that it would be quite a similar process that you in Australia could take if you were interested in this work, which we hope you will be after hearing about it at this webinar. So the process we took, the first thing we always say is it's really important to get organizational buy-in. And what we mean by that is start having conversations, start talking to the people in your teams, start to feel out and put the feelers out and see whether or not people are interested in this idea of sharing power with nature. And even just having those few conversations can really create these light bulb moments where people think, hold on a minute, that's really interesting. I want to hear more. That may include presenting some case studies, for instance, the case studies that we've shown you here in the UK, and also having people come in and answer questions and talk about the process in a bit more detail so that people really feel that this is something they want to get behind. And we think it's really important to have those conversations before you get started. Then there is a real creative aspect to the work that we do with organizations where we come in and we can do workshops or we can brainstorm ideas. What we really like to say is that there isn't really a one size fits all in terms of bringing nature into the room. It may be, for instance, one organization wants to put a river on the board, or somebody wants to put a mountain or a part of the ecosystem. It doesn't have to just be nature. As you've heard, we've got an example of nature and we've got an example of nature in future generations. So there is an opportunity for you to be creative, think about what's best for your organization, and really take time to make sure that what you're doing is right for the industry that you work in and the type of people that you serve in terms of stakeholders or funders or the community. It's also important to think about defining your scope. So, as I've just said, you don't necessarily have to have nature. There's lots of different aspects you could bring into the room, and it's important to make sure you've got a clear definition of who it is you're sharing power with if you do want to do this work. How do you define nature? Lots of different people define nature in different ways. So, and how do you define future generations if you're going to bring future generations in? There's an academic and exciting creative piece here where you can really go into detail and think about how you're going to set those definitions. As you've heard, this is about bringing nature's rights into the room. So how are you going to define those rights? What kind of rights are you going to give away? And again, this is an example of really being creative and thinking hard about what it is you want to do differently. As Brontie said, this is about telling new stories. This isn't just a tick box exercise of saying, we've got nature in the room, everything's fine now. You've got to really think carefully and creatively about how you're going to share power. For instance, are you going to give nature the right to information? Are you going to give the representative for nature extra time away and get more information, whether that's through external experts, bringing other people into the conversation? Are you going to give nature a right to vote? Are you going to give nature a right to veto decisions in your boardroom if you are bringing them into the board? So all of these different things are considerations that you can have together as a team and things that you can really think about and make sure that the type of power that you're sharing is the type of power that you want to share, and also that you've really thought through the process of how you're going to do that. Thanks, Brontie. I think ready for the next slide. This is really, I spoke about this video about this idea of transparency, making sure that there is a separation of powers. So what we mean by that is of models and implementation models that you can include when you do bring nature into the boardroom can really enhance a kind of vision that you're showing publicly. So having a clear responsibility for the role and having clear charter of rights is really important. But also the transparency that you build in is really important. So what if you have nature in the room, for instance, and there's a boardroom decision and nature disagrees? How are you going to that, if at all? Are you going to make those decisions public? Are you going to have, for instance, an end of year report, as Faith in Nature do, where nature can have their right to say how the decisions have been made over the past year and how things could have been done differently? So there are transparency and accountability measures that you can build in to the process. And there's public dialogue, there's engagement. So there's the right for nature to speak publicly if there is a disagreement. So all of these things can help bring in transparency and accountability. The next part of the process is voting in the changes. So you've managed to be creative, you've got organizational buy-in, you've got a model that you really feel works for your organization, and then it's time to put that model to the organization and get it voted in. And sometimes that can take a while. Sometimes it doesn't always happen at first instance. And I think there is a real need in this whole process for patience and answering questions and coming back and remodeling everything to make sure that the whole organization feels behind the changes that you're making. Because I think if you do that, you've got a lot more chance of it really being successful in the long term. And
Excuse me, Jessica, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Someone's just pointed out your slides may not be moving. We're still looking at the process we took.
yeah, that's right.
Oh.
We're in the second slide of process we took, voting in the changes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry to
And
interrupt.
no, thank you, Michelle. And then the next step in the process is changing the constitution. So this is the kind of legal and governance changes that need to happen to ensure that there is real change happening from inside. And we always say it's really important at this stage, if you do make these changes, to get some kind of independent legal advice, because these changes are changes which can be entrenched. There is a legal change that you're making if you are making nature a director. And these are decisions you have to think about carefully. But when you do, the real power is the fact that this does have a legal underpinning. And it's then time to appoint and advocate for nature. So at this point, it's putting out a job description, making sure you have the right person who's going to take on that role. It is a big responsibility, and it's important to make sure that the person taking it on is thinking about this not from a human-centric perspective, because there's something different here. It's about bringing nature's voice into the room. How are we going to make this less human-centric? How are we going to make this more focused on nature? So making sure that when you do appoint, that person has a really clear job description, job role, internal protocols and policies to act as guide rails for that person to take on that responsibility and advocate and speak for nature. And then we always ask for organisations who do this to keep the storytelling alive, keep coming back, keep talking about it, keep telling other organisations about the journey they've been on, what worked, what didn't. And that's why we've brought Kelly and Laura along today, because it's really important to hear other people's stories and hear how this has impacted their organisation. So moving on to the next slide. So this is a question we often get asked at Lawyers for Nature. For instance, if you've got an organisation that serves environmental causes in the community, you might think, well, why can't we all speak for nature? We're all sitting around that boardroom. We all care about the environment. We all care about the communities we serve. Why can't we all just be advocates for nature? Or you've got a company like Faith in Nature and everybody around that boardroom wants to do the right thing. They all care about nature. Why not all just give everyone in the board a remit to speak for nature? And we always say, if we go to the next slide, thanks, Brontie. We use a swimming pool analogy at Lawyers for Nature, which is when you have a group of adults around a pool with lots of kids swimming. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when the time when there is most likely to be an accident in that pool is when all of those parents are kind of watching, but not one of those parents is responsible for the children swimming. So there might be much more adults than there are children, and they all want to do the right thing because that's their kids in the pool and they want to make sure that they're safe. But not one of those adults has been given the responsibility to make sure that all of the kids are safe in the pool. Whereas if just one of those adults is appointed, say 1 adult per hour with the responsibility of checking that everybody's okay, accidents are far less likely to happen. And we use this analogy because at Lawyers for Nature, we say that nature needs a lifeguard. It's got to that point, unfortunately, where we are in such a state of crisis with nature that we really do need to have people who are committed, who are completely responsible, accountable to nature. And that is the state of the affairs that we're in today with the world. We are no longer in a place where we can all just speak for nature. We've got to do more. We've got to do things differently. And we've got to make sure we have this ultimate responsibility, accountability, and transparency. And that's why we say that having an advocate on the board, somebody whose pure remit is just to speak on behalf of nature and nature's rights, is so important. Another thing that we're asked about is, what about your duties to the organisation? And we know that everyone who's appointed legally as a director of a company or an organisation has duties to act in the best interests of that organisation. So, and what they reasonably believe is the best for the company as a whole. And we say that that doesn't necessarily matter in terms of having an advocate specifically speaking for nature. They can still have the best interests of the company as a whole, or the organisation if it's a non-profit. But directors are also allowed to take on specific portfolio roles. So, for instance, finance, risk, sustainability, health and safety. And those roles don't necessarily give those people extra authority over the rest of the directors, but they do carry extra responsibility. And going back to the swimming pool analogy, if a director isn't the sole decision maker on that specific issue, but they have the sole responsibility for feeding back information, for being the expert in the room on that specific issue, whether it's finance or risk or nature, it means they act as an informed guide. They help the board understand and make decisions, and they have an area of expertise in decision making, which is really important. So a director for nature is just the same as having a specific portfolio. They have specific insight on environmental or biodiversity matters, and it means that they can give informed, reasoned decisions to help the decisions being made in the room about nature. What if there are conflicts? There are conflicts. There will be conflicts. There are often conflicts in boardroom decisions. So there may be a conflict between what nature or the advocate for nature wants as against the rest of the company or against the person in charge of finance. That does happen. But what it means is that you've got all the information you need to try and resolve those conflicts. So there are lots of tests you can apply as well. You can have a least harm test or a best interest test. You can have you can utilize legal tests which are out there, which help us resolve conflicts every day. And judges have to deal with this every day when weighing up what is in the best interest, for instance, for a child in a family law case. And you can do the same with nature. How can we create the least harm? How can we make sure we are keeping nature's interests alive in all of our decision making? And I think Simeon from Face of Nature, who you had just heard from in that video, has said that rather than this slowing down decision making, this is actually sped up decision making in the boardroom, because it means you have nature being able to go away, get expert decisions, utilize expert opinion, have time to get the information they need to come back. And so it doesn't create more conflicts. In fact, it helps conflicts get resolved far quicker. And how can we all speak for nature? Well, this is a question we're still battling with, and this is a relatively new legal intervention. We don't have all of the answers, and I'll be the first to say that. We've heard that Faith and Nature have a question, I think, up on their wall: what would nature say? But what's really emerged over the last few years of doing this project is one thing that's really important is moving away from decisions being human-centric towards a more eco or biocentric way of thinking and making decisions. Keeping asking that question, what would nature say? Not what's best for us, not what's best for our shareholders, our suppliers, our stakeholders, but what is best for nature. And there are lots of things you can do to assist in that kind of sensing of what is best for nature. Signalling, data, research, calling on external experts. If it is a particular ecosystem you're looking at, how can you really look at it in more detail and work out what is best for that ecosystem? Keep analysing, keep developing new methods of sensing and testing and asking those questions. But what we will say at Lawyers for Nature is that we simply cannot continue with business as usual. We are facing multiple crises on multiple levels, and we have to start thinking differently. We have to start telling new stories and acting differently as a result of those new stories. And this is a tangible change that you can make in your businesses and your organizations, changing the culture from the top all the way down to the bottom, and asking questions about what nature would think, how nature would act, would want you to act. And I think that comes to the end of our presentation. Just the last slide. The real magic is found in a version of collective faith. It is in choosing to first imagine, then to believe, and then we can finally come together to build an equitable society that we and the more than human world deserves. It is incumbent on those holding any power to, at the very least, start the conversation. And that's what we're asking you to do today. So thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much. And I think Brontie and Jessica will now be in conversation with Kelly and Laura.
Yes, thank you. So I think, Laura, we were going to come to you first. And just
Hi.
to remind everyone out there, hi, Laura, do you want to say a bit about who you are and where you work?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and thanks everyone for being here, and thank you, Michelle and Brontie and Jessie, for the invite. I work at Faith in Nature. We make soap. We're not a enormously glamorous company. We have a factory in the north of England, in Greater Manchester, where we make all our products. They are now 99.5% natural. So we do use the natural world as a resource, and we do have a very real impact on nature. And that is one of the conflicts inherent in our business, and it's something that we try to navigate every day. Sorry, I've just realised there's a huge amount of glare coming through. Apologies about that. It's the sun. So we're very proud of Faith in Nature to be a B Corp. We certified in 2022. We're also now a living wage employer, and we're also trialling the 4-day week at Faith in Nature. Both of those two last developments are things that have happened in the last year, and I think they're part of our journey towards being more aware of how our staff are connected to our success as a business, how much importance we place on our staff's connection with the natural world really underpins everything that we do at Faith in Nature. And so over the last sort of year or so, we've really been focusing in on starting to look after our own staff a bit more, and understanding that really that is the basis of all of our success, really. We do annual impact reporting at Faith in Nature. We cover all of our material impacts on nature. So we cover all 3 scopes of carbon footprint. We do waste, we do water, we do plastic. And then this year, we're also doing a new reporting metric, which is our impact on the natural world. So we'll be looking at our 30 sort of top suppliers and trying to understand the impact that they have on the natural world through their supply chain, and therefore into our supply chain. Because we're a manufacturing business, a lot of the work that I do with our Nature Guardian focuses actually on the products that we make. So about 80% of our carbon footprint sits within our supply chain. So that's all of our ingredients and the core componentry that we use when we make our products. So a lot of the decisions that we have taken to the board that our Nature Guardian has voted on are product-based. Last year, we had a number of votes involving our Nature Guardian. We voted on reformulating the vast majority of our products to improve the naturality. So our Nature Guardian voted on those reformulations. Those reformulations also included not only an increase in naturality, but a shift towards regenerative sourcing. So we're starting to look at how we can source as many ingredients as possible in a regenerative way. We also moved into infinitely recyclable and recycled aluminium. We're trying to move away from plastic. The vast majority of the plastic that we use is recycled, but it's still plastic, poses enormous challenges in the environment. So we're starting to try and kind of move away from plastic towards aluminium. And then a third big vote that we had last year, actually, Brontie, you were part of this vote. We use palm derivatives in our products. We've reduced them down from 16 to 13. Everything that we use is RSPO certified, but we know that's not really good enough. So we've been investigating alternatives, and we funded a feasibility study in Sumatra to understand if we could start sourcing palm derivatives that were farmed using regenerative agriculture methods. And what that feasibility study showed us is that while it's very, very possible, we actually wouldn't be able to then afford the end product to include it in our own products. So we had to take a vote on whether we were going to continue funding this work or whether we were going to move away from it. And we all had to vote. And that was really challenging. We had to vote to move away from that particular project. But because we had not one, but actually two nature guardians at a time in the room, the nature guardians suggested that we ring fence the budget that, that we could have afforded to spend on that project, that we ring fence that budget for future projects to try and solve this enormous challenge that we have with palm derivatives in a way that actually works for Faith in Nature, so that we can continue to price our products in a way which makes them accessible to the largest number of people. So those are three big votes that we've had with our Nature Guardian. Do you want me to keep going?
No, thank you. Thank you, Laura. That was really, really useful to hear that kind of practical insight to how the Nature Guardians impacted Faith in Nature and decisions being made. Kelly, coming over to you, do you want to tell us a bit more about the House of Hackney journey and how you decided to set up a dual role for future generations on the board, and how can you see that role developing over the coming decade?
Yeah, of course. So hi everyone, I'm Kelly. I'm head of regeneration for House of Hackney. In summary, I guess I'm responsible for leading the transformation of the business towards being a nature-centered business. And I should say we're an interiors brand. We're also SME size. So we see a really big opportunity with being able to, just set a really good example for practically how nature-centered business can work for SME size businesses. Here in the UK, like 99% of businesses, private sector businesses, I should say, are SME size, as is in the US, which is our other market as well. So that's what our kind of aim is, inspired, I will say, but very much inspired by the work of Faith in Nature around this, that we want to put out in the next few years, a sort of green print for how we've gone about doing this. That's not to say that how we're doing this is the absolute correct way of doing this. We're very much students of it, learning as we go. But we think that the idea of just sharing and being very collaborative in an honest way about the challenges and possibilities with this work so that it can evolve together is going to be really important. And also just being able to speed up change. I'm just going to let my cat out. Sorry, it's clawing away at the door. Just give me 1 second. Sorry.
Cats always know how to interfere with a webinar.
Yeah,
my cat keeps climbing over me and onto the bookshelf. So yes, I feel your pain, Kelly. I really do.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yes, it's been sitting
just
there.
For the record, here in Australia, my cat is an inside cat. I don't want anyone thinking that I let my cat out to kill things. Inside cat only. Please continue.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Sorry, it's just happened to start while I was talking. In terms of how we set up, so if I'm really honest, it was very basic. Faith in Nature put out a how-to guide, and I found it on LinkedIn and went, oh my God, this is amazing. And I took it to our founders and I took it to our managing director. And I will say at House of Hackney, it's a really unique place to work. And I've been working in sustainability and brands for probably about 18 plus years. And my whole career has been selling the business case. And I was getting to a stage in my career where I was very bored of selling the business case, because I was turning on the news and that's the business case. Why are we having this conversation? Now I do realize that the business case still needs to be sold. But at House of Hackney, the values were very deeply embedded in how the founders and the managing director worked anyway. So when I took this to them, it wasn't really even a lengthy discussion. I think the challenge that we had of House of Hackney is that we are small, but we did have a board, but our board had private equity investors who sat on the board at the time. Our founders were majority shareholders, but our challenge around putting a nature and future generations director on the board was negotiating with our private equity investors about why this was a thing that they should agree to. So assisted by, you Lawyers for Nature, we had light, medium and dark green options for what the roles should look like. And we had a lot of back and forth with them. So to be honest, that was the part that took the most amount of time in getting an agreement around it, and included things like, if I remember off the top of my head, but say the light green option was that it was an observer role, and then the mid green option was that it had a vote, and then the dark green option would have a veto, and there was lots of other provisions in it that we could choose from. And eventually they agreed to it, but it took us finding those leverage points with them. So they had invested in us because they knew we were sort of a disruptor brand, and that we had quite strong brand equity in us. Even though we weren't huge, we had a strong following. But also I very much made the case about getting prepared for upcoming legislation. Like, because of my background in sustainability, I was watching all the legislative developments in the EU. The UK was a little bit behind, and I mean the US was our other market as well, but there was some rumblings in the key states there like California. So we spoke to them about that. We spoke to them about the preparedness, but also that they had invested in us because of this really strong brand equity, and this would be an investment in keeping that going for the future. So, and then they went for it, which was amazing, and we were very happy. But we got the it was nature and future generations. But unlike Faith in Nature, our position didn't have a vote in the initial stages. That's actually currently being in the process of being changed now, which is amazing. But Brontie was our Nature and Future Generations Director for the first 18 months of the position. And it was so incredibly useful to have Brontie there for it, because I will be honest, we didn't know what we were doing. We had a deep sense of, yes, we want to be nature connected, and our definition of nature at House of Hackney also includes humans. So it's that very holistic sense of it. But we didn't legally understand what we were doing and how to embed it within the business. So Brontie was there for a very important part of that, which was holding our hands through the legal process, changing of our articles of incorporation, and then embedding it right across the team. So we actually took quite a chunky piece of time to embed the idea of having a nature director, which was so useful because it gave a deep understanding to the whole team that this is something we're taking seriously and something that we're going to do now, and everyone's going to be involved. Whereas before, when I've been in businesses, if you are heading sustainability, you're another function. Yes, it involves people from different parts of the organization, but you are another function and you are a voice trying to advocate for that function on your own. But this gave it that real senior legitimacy of having an outside person coming and being the voice. And then all the team had access to this person as well, which you never really do with the board director. So yeah, and in terms of the future generations aspect of it, it's been an interesting journey for us because we have a very specific definition of future generations that's in our Articles of Incorporation. So for us, it means 7 generations of humans, plants and animals on Earth from today's date. And the reason for wanting to have the future generations is we could talk legally about nature, but that can be nature in the now, and you're making decisions for the now. And actually we wanted to really acknowledge that it has to be lasting change. We have to be considering the future of all life on Earth, essentially. So we changed our articles of incorporation. I have it here, our purpose clause. It's quite short. I can read it out so people understand what the actual responsibility of all the directors in the company, but specifically the nature director. So our purpose clause in our article states that the objects of the company are to promote the success of the company. So that's obviously financial success included, for the benefit of its members, and while delivering through its business and operations, have a positive impact on nature and minimize the prospect of any harmful impact of the business and operations on nature, and have due regard for the interests of future generations in a manner commensurate with the size and resources of the company taken as a whole. And I think for us, that one's really important because we are an SME size. So it's interesting when hiring a nature director, because you kind of do need someone with commercial sensibilities at the same time as having deep regard for nature now and an understanding of that future generations piece as well. We can talk a bit more about it if people have questions when they come to chat, but that's what our articles state. But for us, we've had loads of internal debate about the future generations bit, because I kind of practically think, well, everything we're doing now, and if it stays the way we're doing it, we keep moving towards that trajectory, well, that is going to have an impact on future generations. So why do we need another formal strategy around it? And we feel like maybe there should be. So we've had lots of just conversations and research. Like we spoke to Jane Davidson, who was, she's a former Minister for Environment and Sustainability in the Welsh Government, and she was responsible for one of the early architects of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act in Wales. So we spoke to Jane. We've taken courses looking at Indigenous people's rights and communities. We've had just conversations with young people, young activists, trying to, because when you think of future generations more broadly, what we found, it was very, in other people's mind, it's very people-centric, whereas we're trying to be a lot broader with it. So if I'm honest, that part is still quite in flux, and we are in conversations around it. And like one of the conversations we've been having recently, like if we were to take the future generations we have the biggest impact on, I will say that wallpaper and cotton fabric are our biggest kind of natural resources that we use, extract across the company. I would be like, should we have a forestry expert who can speak on behalf of forests? And should we have someone who's an expert in soil? And should we have an expert in someone who's in people? So it's hard at the moment. It's one person who represents both things, as Brontie mentioned, but we're also thinking about how we evolve this, because that one person, it's so difficult for one person to represent all the things. But also practically, I will say, we're limited in budget. We're an SME and we only have a certain amount of money. We want to remunerate people for their expertise as well. So we're still in the early days of figuring it out, but it's exciting though. We get to meet so many amazing people, and we're coming across people who are working on interspecies councils and other ways of doing boards and having youth councils and all these cool things. So if anything, it's been a very practical but also a very hopeful exercise as well. So I'll stop there for now, but if people have specific questions, we can go into it afterwards.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That's really interesting to hear that, and to hear a bit more about the process and the kind of challenges that you faced along the way. I think it's important for people to understand that. Laura, just coming back to you briefly, could you just tell us a bit more about the kind of governance system that you've got with the nature-related matters and a separate committee, just how that works? I think that's quite important for people to hear, that there is that layer of governance that you found at Faith and Nature.
Yeah, so Faith in Nature we're a family-owned and family-run business, and whilst the family have been totally supportive of this, and it was Simeon's idea in the first place to do Nature on the Board at Faith in Nature, one of our challenges has been, how do you take that idea and that level of governance down through the whole business? We are a manufacturing business. We have a factory. We have a marketing department. We have a production hall. We have filling lines. People are making decisions on a daily basis, which actually do affect our impact on nature. And so our task really was to take that layer of governance and work out how to filter it down through the whole business. So what we have now is a nature and sustainability task force, which is a cross-functional team. So we have representatives from every different department within Faith in Nature. We meet on a monthly basis, and we work together on a dashboard of about 15 initiatives at the moment, which are initiatives that my Nature Guardian and myself have designed together. So our current Nature Guardian is Dr. Juliette Rose, and she is the development director at the Eden Project in Cornwall. She's a plant scientist and a horticulturalist by trade. She's enormously knowledgeable about plant sciences, and so she's been really helpful when we've been starting to look at our supply chain and the impacts on nature there. So she and I really set the nature and sustainability strategy, and then I work through that with our task force. We have key impact metrics that we've set for each of those different initiatives, and they're hugely broad. Some of those, it's ranging from working with our operations director to reduce the impact of our waste, or working with our head of supply chain on the sourcing of our labels and what material that's made from, right through to we're doing green social prescribing training with our mental health first aiders. So we have a team of mental health first aiders in the factory, and they're all having training in green social prescribing, so they can signpost local green community projects that they can get involved in to help with mental health wellbeing. So there's a huge range of projects that we're working on. So we have this task force who are working operationally with me, and we meet monthly and we report on our metrics back up to the board and, crucially, the Nature Guardian. So we've got that reporting process internally now. We also do, as you mentioned earlier, Jessie, an annual report about nature on the board and the votes that have taken place and the work that's been going on. So that goes on our website every November. There's one due any minute now. Our Nature Guardian has a right to reply in that report. So Juliet is writing that now. She has access to an additional budget for research. If there are votes coming up, she gets additional notice so that she can go away and research any issues that she feels pertinent to how she may or may not vote. And then she also has the right to take out an advert or to publish a thought piece if we were to go in a direction against the way that she's actually voted. That hasn't happened yet. I really hope it doesn't. I like to think it wouldn't happen, but it is, all of those mechanisms are there for her. We've also set up, there's an internal email address for her, which is nature@faithinnature. So any of our staff can have access to her at any time. She came and did a site visit just last month. In fact, we did a wildflower planting exercise with staff in the spring. This was the follow-on from that session, and people really do ask sometimes slightly awkward questions. We have this question, what would nature say, which all staff are encouraged to ask, but sometimes that's a bit awkward. If I've spent a long time with the ops director working out how we recycle 6 waste streams on site now, and someone came up to me and said, what's the point in us doing all this sorting if the guys come and collect it all in the same truck? What would nature say? So it gets thrown back at you sometimes, but that is the whole purpose of it, really. It's very empowering for our staff. They're coming to site every day. They do see the impacts that we have. And so it's important that they have the right to question us as well. I think that's all I've got on mechanics.
That's great. Thank you, Laura. Really helpful. And then Kelly, final question for you. Could you talk a bit about the related things that have happened as a result of having nature on the board in terms of the organisation? For example, royalties for nature, true cost accounting, how it's impacted the organisation, decisions being made.
Yeah, sure. So I think, as I said, the first major thing that we do was really embedded the idea of having a nature director across the whole business. So we spent a lot of time with the team and we brought them into, we have like a mission roadmap, but we brought them into the development of the mission roadmap. We gave everybody training, general training on sustainability and regeneration, and then very specific technical training. And then we gave everyone KPIs, and they've turned into IPIs, which are impact performance indicators. There's chat about nature performance indicators. But anyway, we're just a step at a time. So it's very, very embedded in all the team. And I mean, that's for loads of reasons. It's just a smart thing to do for the long-term survival of it. But also we're a lean company. You know, I'm a one-person show in the team. So it's not right that it would hinge on one sort of function, that it's in everyone's job description. So that was really useful. We have regular monthly progress update meetings for the whole team so everyone can see what's happening across every single function, so nothing is siloed. We have more informal, like regeneration inspiration sessions. Yes, there's loads that goes on. And I think the really important thing for us is, while that's all quite technical, it was around what Laura mentioned earlier, is like nature connection, because there's research that's come out. I mean, it's probably just really broad, generally known research, but that the more connected people feel to the natural world or to nature, the more likely they are to take action to protect it. And while we're talking about all these very general technical things, like a spreadsheet, the team is going to be like, what, another KPI in a spreadsheet? Okay. So what we wanted to do is give them more time to become more connected to nature. So we have, similar to Faith in Nature, 4-day working week that we launched in April time. It's called Nature Fridays. And the idea is that people just get out and spend time in nature. They can do whatever they like on that day in particular, but we heavily encourage spending time in nature. And then the team come and they share, and we have like an internal library of resources where people can fill in what they've done and share about the experiences they have, and sometimes they do it together as well. And we were supported by the Nature Connectedness Network here in the UK through the University of Derby, who I know Faith in Nature work with as well. Miles Butler and Richardson and Carly Butler, who run it, and Carly's been brilliant at supporting us in how to measure that nature connectedness. So when we launched Nature Connectedness, we measured the baseline connection that everybody had, and then we'll repeat that next year as well to see as it had an improvement. It's so difficult to prove that these things work because there's so many other factors that can enhance someone's well-being, financial literacy, their social connections, all these things. But just in general, what we want to see are people noticing nature. There's certain indicators that the Nature Connectedness network have been very instrumental in helping us to hone in on. If you start to notice nature, how often you feel wondering, they're just indicators that your connection is becoming deeper. Because what we want is that people feel proactive. You'll always get the spectrum of deep greens in your business and people in the middle, and then people who just come to work and do their thing, and that's fine. But can you just move people over naturally? And so that was one thing that we did for the team. But in a much bigger sense then, with the nature director, we just talked about the opportunity that we have as a business, because we do have quite a captive audience as House of Hackney. Like, we are a high-end brand, and I see people commenting about maybe the price of our products in the comments, which we can talk a little bit about later as well. But we are kind of I'm going to say a niche, but we have a very strong captive audience as well. But it's like, even if not everyone's buying from us, what stories can we tell to kind of bring that across? So one thing that we thought was, I guess, within our sphere of influence to do was share the story of what we're doing, because the brand is known for its storytelling. It's known for its beautiful visuals as well. So what we wanted to do was, as I mentioned earlier, is create this nature-centered green print and just share it. We don't know the content form, but let's just say it's a really long PDF at the moment about every single thing that we've done in terms of decisions that we made, what worked well, what didn't work well, as a kind of a how-to guide. Because I think, and Laura, maybe you'll probably agree with me here, that there's so much theory out there, and there's loads of frameworks, but the frameworks tell you what you're supposed to do. They don't tell you how to do these things. And your time is so consumed by figuring out the hows that we just want to share the how. And it might make sense for some people in their different contexts. So anyway, one thing that the Nature and Future Generations Director role has helped us to do is to really focus in on how to piece together that green print. So we obviously started with the governance at the top, and we have our director, and we changed our articles of incorporation. We have a mission, the whole team are behind it. But the next step there was trying to look at our finances and how we were defining success. So we started to look at Capital's coalition accounting, which looks at your natural capital, your human capital, your social capital, and measuring everything that you extract and everything that you put back, but giving it all one common metric, which is a financial metric. Now, there's loads of debate around this as well, but for us, we found it extremely useful as a decision-making tool, because while I said that the founders and the managing director are very, very bought in, we're also still an SME-sized business who needs to survive in the current economy. So it does, at the end of the day, just come down to commercials. So when you can show the benefit or the loss that we're going to have in the short, medium and long term with these figures, it's been really useful. So we've been developing a nature profit and loss accounting statement, and there's much bigger other companies that have done this. I think we're probably one of the smaller kind of sizes to be able to do it, but we have a figure now. We've done our first pilot last year, and we're moving into our second one for what our financial profit is, but what our social profit and loss is, and what our environmental profit and loss is. And it's a really excellent decision-making tool. And another piece of work that we also did that kind of came before that a decision was taken to look at the true cost of our product. Because as I said earlier, our two main product categories are wallpaper and fabric. So that's direct extraction from forests and direct extraction from soil in terms of growing cotton. And we wanted to figure out the split of funds. So I should say we have a 1% fund that goes into projects and partnerships that can help us to achieve our mission. In the past, that money has been spent more on, I'm going to say, intuition. So we have an excellent partnership with the World Land Trust, and we protect X number of threatened habitats every year, which is super. But we started to think about, actually, do we need to be more geographically specific about where our projects are if we are extracting from certain places? So we've done loads of traceability.
Excuse me, Kelly.
Yeah, sure.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We've only got about 14 minutes left,
Oh,
and
fine.
we've got about 40 questions, so I might jump in and try to group them if that's okay.
Sure. Go for it.
Thanks so much. But everything you're giving us in terms of your experiences are so rich. And thank you to all of the team for sharing links in here. So AELA will pull a lot of them together. A lot of people are dropping off. It's 20 to 9 at night here in New South Wales, and it's 20 to 8 here in Australia. So in Queensland, I'm getting tired. So what I want to say before more people drop off is AELA is extremely interested in this space, and we're going to raise a few issues here. A number of people have been asking about greenwashing and some of the problematic aspects of colonialism in these spaces. So Australia has a whole nother layer of stuff to think about, but I'll come back to that. But what we're going to do tonight is a call out to anyone who's interested in nature on the board or nature in your group. AELA's already working with a whole bunch of communities who are looking at different kinds of non-corporate, like citizens' assemblies, councils, interspecies councils and youth councils, river groups. We're working with a lot of different folks who are doing a lot of different things. But if you're particularly interested in nature on the board for your organisations, we'd love to hear from you. And we'll keep working with Lawyers for Nature to build a kind of body of work in Australia for those folks who are interested. And also a shout out to anyone who's a law student or a lawyer who might like to become involved in some of these, because we suspect that as more and more groups are interested, both Lawyers for Nature and AELA are super keen to ensure that it becomes more of a culture shift, not just a one-on-one kind of service delivery. Right, so to some questions, if that's okay. I've lumped them all together in about 4 chunks. One is people kind of querying the value of some of this in the big scheme of the impact on nature. Another group of questions are much more about the practical stuff, but I think we've covered a lot of them. Then there's also some specific questions, including someone from the UK, thank you, Sarah, about the role of local councils and a little bit more about the Welsh Commission's experience as a government agency. And there's a whole bunch of questions about the best way for the nature guardian or the whole structure of your organisation to really connect with nature. And this is very much a question I resonate with, which bit of nature? So I assume, and we'll get to it, but there's an assessment of where your impacts are. And this is something that we often critique in AELA, that Western culture isn't very good at place-based stuff. Everything's an abstract. Oh, we've reduced our energy consumption. We've reduced our water consumption. But most people can't tell you which river or dam or system that their water or electricity comes from. So are you in a nature for the board kind of role, being really specific about where those places are? And obviously it sounds like Laura and Kelly, you are. So just quickly, and please feel free to fire off quick answers. How do you, well, actually, I'll start with one of my questions because that helps to connect the greenwashing more realistically. One thing I was interested in is, what does the business community generally, how are they responding to these ideas? Do they see it something as something to get on the bandwagon with, or do you find you have people still going, yeah, no, profits first, this is just a whole bunch of fluffy stuff? Laura, you're grinning at me. What is your response been? Yeah.
You've sort of covered. I've had a lot of skepticism, particularly from bigger businesses who don't have a governance structure into which this neatly slots. But I've also had a lot of really, really encouraging conversations with particularly B Corps and particularly other small businesses. We're not a big business, and particularly businesses who are family owned and who have a governance structure into which this fits. And it tends to be the bigger businesses who can't see how this might work for them, who dismiss it as greenwashing. I had some very interesting conversations at the Said Business School at Oxford University, where there was a lot of kind of skepticism about this as a model. But I think the fact that we're both Kelly and we're trying to do all this work very, very transparently. And a lot of our conversations they're pretty warts and all about it. The reports that are on our website are very transparent. Different kinds of businesses might have done this behind closed doors and then kind of come out with all the success stories. That's not what we're doing. And so our hope is that tries to kind of meet some of the challenges of the greenwashing side of things, because we are being as honest as we can about the challenges as well.
Really interesting. I actually thought you'd get critiqued as greenwashing from environmental groups who feel you're not doing enough, not big companies who might be disinterested. But we can probably have that as a conversation for another day.
We get critiqued by everyone, to be fair.
Well, I want to say, particularly as I hear what Kelly and Laura, what you've been doing, I want to say that I bang the drum because I think what you're doing is brilliant. And the culture change that you're trying to measure, Kelly, is absolutely real. Those subjective measures. I mean, we work with a lot of people who do the deep ecology and that interconnectedness, and there's a huge impact from that. So please keep going. These stories from businesses are absolutely brilliant. All right, I'll move away from that. I do want to address, there's a couple of questions folks have posed, and I absolutely love them, which is, shouldn't we be in Australia working with Indigenous voices, people who have been living in relationship with and who continue to live in relationship with their local places? Absolutely. And as you know, AELA is devoted to working in deep partnership with Indigenous mates and friends and work friends. And whatever we do in Australia will be focusing on specific places. And once people work out where they think their environmental impacts are, where they can work that out, then we know that there's always someone speaking for country somewhere. And so that deep relationship, I think, is another way that we can build those conversations in Australia. So I'll answer that question, and the answer is absolutely yes. And we'll have to, like these lovely ladies, experiment and find effective ways to do that where it's appropriate in Australia. There's a whole bunch of questions about how best to speak for nature, and I won't go into all of them. I'm just wondering if you could give us perhaps one example of how the Nature Guardian consults with scientists. You've mentioned that. Do they go out into the places that you're affecting and spend time there and see stuff? Or what are some of the stories, very quickly, about how you can speak for nature? Which bit of nature? Who nature? What nature? Yeah.
I've got an example I could probably give from most recently. I mean, yes, they have a wide network. And when we were hiring for the role, we looked for someone specific with that as part of their reach, and not just on one specific area of nature, because we were looking for a more generalized person, but who had a broad one. But we did some traceability work. So in terms of actually finding place, we use a couple of things. So we use our traceability work to go back and use the Nature Guardian as a leverage with suppliers as well. So actually, I should say in the early days, we were very explicit with suppliers about the role and that it was there as well. It wasn't just something we didn't speak to them about. And we brought them together to meet with Brontie as well when she was in the role in the early days. But in terms of the place and finding, sorry, what was the point? I just forget.
Well, how let's say that you're looking at your products that are growing coming from cotton in a certain place. How are you working out your relationship with nature? And then how do you think about how that bit of nature is speaking?
Yeah, so sorry, I was trying to remember the example that I was going to give you. So we had some traceability work on our wood fibre. We found that because of the new EUDR regulation, we re-asked for some information, let's say a year later, and we were given different information that we were given the first time around because we had to be given deeper information. And that deeper information showed up a high risk area for us because we also use a risk register tool in the background. Whereas as soon as we're given a place, I will check the register across human rights and environmental situations. And that's when our nature director came into their own this year from one decision that we made, because they actually happen to have a deep network in the particular area that we were talking about, or that had come to light, and we all got to work. Now, it actually resolved itself quite nicely because we had engaged our suppliers. So our suppliers started to look for an alternative source, and our supplier was the one who looks like, fingers crossed it's going to be soon, but may have found an alternative source. But it really helped the due diligence and scenario planning process that our nature director had links into everything from Indigenous communities to companies working on the ground and everything. So that's how it works. We sort of go, do your traceability work first, use the nature director as leverage to push the suppliers to support you to find that information. And when you find the information, and then it's right, who do we know on the ground? And a nature director may not necessarily know people on the ground in an area that you find, but you go out into a network and find those people who do. And it's, I always think it's just so important, the Indigenous peoples, communities that are there, and or if you don't have direct access to them, to a charity or NGO group who does have direct access to local people who can speak on behalf of themselves.
Thank you. There are actually, I've got a couple of questions about localization too. Wouldn't it be easier if our nature voices were all local because our businesses were local? I think that's a whole nother conversation. I might jump into, there's the question about, have you guys been engaged with local councils? And I think, Brontie, you're in there answering while I'm asking here. So there's some answers there. Would you like to address that verbally so everyone can hear? Share it with the class, Brontie.
Sure.
What have you been doing with councils? How can we get inspired to talk to our councils about this?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the most powerful things businesses can do is open the conversation, start the conversation and get it going. And of course, carry it on is super important. But I think what happens is the public sector, and sometimes the charitable sector as well, or third sector, you might call it, and other areas, but particularly the public sector, they tend to lag because there's a huge amount of worry and risk in the public sector. And I think the value here is that businesses do something cool and funky and interesting, and it works, it gets iterated. And then the public sector feel a hell of a lot better and able to go in and do something, right? So I think we always talked about, with Simeon and Laura, particularly in the beginning, we talked about the idea that governments are very unlikely to do something like this. It's very unlikely that we in the UK particularly will see a rights of nature bill getting through our parliamentary systems and then having that legislative control. And so businesses just getting on with it without permission, without seeking permission, without waiting around for heavy legislation and regulation is really, really important to lead the way. And what we've seen is, we did Faith in Nature in 2022, we did House of Hackney end of 2023, beginning of 2024. And in 2025, early summer, late spring, early summer, we started to get inquiries from public bodies. So the National Infrastructure Commission in Wales had appointed a temporary voice of nature within the Infrastructure Commission. We then got contacted by a bunch of councils which have rivers, literally big rivers running right through their cities, saying these are so heavily polluted by the water companies, which we don't control. How can we do this? And so Jessie, Paul and I have been working with a couple of local councils to, first of all, pass a motion to bring in the concept of the voice of nature. And it is very much iterative. So with public bodies, you can't just go straight in because you just don't have electorate buy-in, you don't have executive team buy-in, you don't have the workers who actually sort of make the council function on a day-to-day basis. They have to be taken along with a story. And so this is what I was saying earlier in my speech, is story and ethics and morality are incredibly important. And it does start with, this has already been done here. Here's a story about it. Here's what happened next. Here's the things that went wrong. Here's the things that went right. And those at the council just kind of, you can see them visibly breathing a sigh of relief and saying, oh, we're not the first, because they don't want to be the first.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Same in Australia, actually. Everybody loves a great idea to follow.
They don't want to be the first. And so it's really important to lead by example, even if that example is flawed and imperfect, which nature is, of course, flawed and imperfect all the time in its beautiful way. Can I also just very, very briefly just comment on the politics of place issue? So we've been doing some work around politics of place, and apologies for my presentation today. I've been really ill for 2 weeks, so you probably saw me coughing off screen. Politics of place is incredibly important and it mustn't be left out. When we work with people, and of course we'll continue to work with Michelle, and we'd be happy to consult on anything she's doing with her, we weave politics of place in, and we talk to you about power sharing within place and what it means to anchor to place. And there's some really great research studies out there around when place is disconnected from power and humans are disconnected from place. When you bring place back in, how restorative it can be, how repairing it can be, and how quickly things can change when you bring the concept of place back into decision making and power sharing. So there's definitely some work to be done around that. And one of the things you can just do immediately is go and make decisions in the place that is most affected by your decision. Just make that promise today. Don't even have to go to nature on the board straight away. Just go once a year, 3 times a year, once a month. We go and sit in the place that is most affected by our decision. That could be a thing you do.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. We're actually out of time, so we've talked a little bit about Indigenous, greenwashing, practical stuff. Look, there's so much more we can talk about, but I think we'll start to wrap it up. I really want to thank everybody in the audience, because I know a lot of folks have been starting to drop off, but that's because it's late at night here. And I want to say a huge thank you to you amazing, amazing women over in the UK. Jessica and Brontie, thank you so much for being so very open and sharing your remarkable journey and work. AELA's been watching some of this stuff for a while, but because we're quite small, I'm looking forward to partnering with you and others and doing a lot more of this discussion and leadership work in Australia, and then hopefully getting out of the way and letting people get on with it. Kelly and Laura, your stories, your work, I just want to hugely congratulate you, truly. What an amazing story. Kelly's sitting there with a normal room, and then Laura's got the field of flowers behind you. I think I just want a huge congratulations for you, and really the work that you're doing is trailblazing and wonderful. And I think it was Brontie's written somewhere there, yes, there'll be greenwashing, but that doesn't stop the rest of us. I guess I'd like to finish on 2 notes. I think anything that brings our earth back into focus, particularly for Westerners who've lost that focus, is to be experimented with and absolutely supported and loved. And perhaps a small point on that question in the early presentation about, well, can't everyone speak for nature? I think that's also non-binary. It's a yes and. Companies, representatives, organizations, particularly those with material consumption and use and output, absolutely should be doing this stuff. But AELA's personal mission is to make sure that everyone is an ecological custodian, and that's why we're hungrily focused on a lot of that place-based localization. And I just want to give everyone a heads up, the next couple of years we're going to be banging on a lot about how we crack open the entire legal system and ensure that local people have a right to kinship and a right to care. Because right now in the Australian legal system, there is no right to actually be a local custodian. It's all about challenging those unwanted developments week after week, month after month. And I've just come back from 10 days talking to river communities who are absolutely exhausted and sick of it. I think there's going to be a minor revolution going on in the next few years here in Australia. So I just wanted to flag that wonderful initiative. And again, ladies, thank you. This will not be the last time all of us Aussies harass you for your knowledge and love. And from Australia, where we have blue bees, not just yellow and black bees, where we have animals bouncing around on hind legs, not just walking on four, we say thank you. Nature salutes you. And thank you to all of you lovely folks for joining us tonight. Can't wait to have more conversations. Do send us an email, AELA@earthlaws.org.au, if you want to connect into the Aussie stuff. And Jessica and Brontie and I will be brewing up some fabulous ways to support folks and get things going. I also want 2 final shout outs. Dominic Hess, thank you for joining us tonight. Dominic and Regen Melbourne are doing some really cool things and experimenting with nature on the board in their own way in the beginnings of that. And if Duncan's still on, I want to say a huge thank you to Duncan Wallace for checking in with us last week around his expertise on corporate law in Australia. Jessica and Brontie, did you want to say any final comments or invitations?
Oh, just thank you to you, Michelle. Thanks so much for sharing the story with us and working with us collaboratively. We really love being around you. So yeah, we're happy to help you with anything you're doing with people. So yeah, do stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, for hosting.
Thank you so much. Awesome women. Awesome women. All right, lovelies. If you would like to share your thoughts, thank yous. I often say a daggy air clap is a nice way to say thank you on Zoom, or press those love hearts. And without further ado, we'll wrap it up 4 minutes over, but fabulously fabulous. So have a great morning, lunchtime, afternoon, or evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having us, Michelle. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.